I hope you're ready to blow out your retinas and maybe even your back, because today I'm reviewing the brightest 4K monitor I have ever seen and will ever see, because now I'm blind. But the good news is, not only is it bright, but this monitor has a lot of surprises between its up its sleeves that I think will make it a very attractive option to those looking for a solid 32-inch 4K HDR monitor. But enough around, it's time I got my slimy fingers all over this bad boy, which the monitor I'm reviewing today is the INNOCN 32M2V, and sure, it might look like Megatron's one of his lackeys and they had a deformed secret child, but you know me, it's not about the size, it's about how you use it. And oh boy, did INNOCN use this thing to its full potential. But I know what you're asking: what are the specs and why am I not subscribed already? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's get into those specs. This is a 144Hz IPS 32-inch 16:9 mini LED gaming monitor with 138 pixels per inch, a reported response time of 1 millisecond. It has gsync and freesync compatibility, an HDR 1000 rating, and 99% DCI P3 coverage. The stand is decent, though it doesn't rotate much. It is VESA mount compatible, and most importantly, it has two HDMI 2.1 ports, meaning not only can you get true 10-bit HDR over your PC, but you can also plug in a console such as an Xbox Series X or a PlayStation 5 at the same time, something that was sorely needed on the PG32 UQX, which, by the way, that thing went for like $3,000, somewhere around there. Absolutely ridiculous. But in any case, it also has one DisplayPort 1.4, a 90-watt USB-C, two USB-A ports, one USB-B, and a 3.5mm jack. And if you're wondering, yes, it does have speakers, but they're absolutely abysmal. And now for the part that's gonna leave a PVC-shaped imprint on the bottom of your desk. The price is between $850 to $900, depending on if there are discounts going on, which of course I will have an Amazon affiliate link to this monitor linked in the description below if you're interested in purchasing it. Now, $850 to $900 isn't necessarily cheap, but when you compare it to the PG32 UQX, which once again, around $3,000, well, actually, this is a very good deal for a high-quality 4K mini LED HDR monitor. So overall, it's sounding like a banger on paper, but does it perform? Well, let's find out. Starting off with color calibration and accuracy in HDR, it's not bad, but it's definitely not perfect. As you can see, none of the values are quite lining up where they should be, and it is a little bit off when it comes to the temperature at around 7000K, where we would like to see it around 6500K to meet industry standards. Now, also with HDR enabled, you can't really adjust the color balance at all, but fortunately, I will have an ICC profile linked in the description below on my Patreon, along with all the other displays I review to help correct it. So make sure you go there if you want to be editing photos. Now, in SDR, I have better news. Fortunately, you can get this to around 6500K with balanced RGB with a delta E of just 0.3, whereas in HDR, it had a delta E of 2.3. So if you are going to be editing photos in SDR, I highly suggest disabling HDR for this display, unfortunately. Now, in terms of the color gamut, in HDR, I got 90.9% sRGB, 63.8% Adobe RGB, and 66% DCI P3. In terms of the volume, 94% sRGB, 64.8% Adobe RGB, and 66.6% DCI P3. So not too good there. However, if you switch it to the sRGB mode, it actually is very good. In terms of the gamut, we're talking 99.8% sRGB, 98.3% Adobe RGB, and 97.5% DCI P3. And in the volume, 174.8% sRGB, 120.5% Adobe RGB, and 123.8% DCI P3. So again, if you're editing, definitely be in the sRGB mode. Now, in terms of the brightness, HDR, what are we looking at here? Well, as you can see, the INNOCN 32M2V is pulling in a very impressive 1011 nits in a 10% window, which is a little bit better than the S95B, although it is falling short of the Neo G8 or the Asus PG32 UQX, which are all mini LED displays. However, why did I call this the brightest display when it doesn't look so here? Well, when you take a look at the 100% window, it can actually flash 1182 nits on a full 100% white screen. This is the brightest I have ever seen thus far out of any of the mini LED, OLED, or LCD panels I have ever tested. And oh boy, can you tell, it is a very, very bright display. In fact, now I'm legally blind. But moving on to the peak brightness in Battlefield 1, here once again it comes in second with 1011 nits, bringing it far ahead of the S95B and Neo G8 in terms of the brightness you can expect to see in games. So as you can see, even though the Neo G8 on paper should technically be a better display, in practice is a far less bright display than this one, and there's a number of other reasons such as scan lines as to why I believe the Neo G8 is not a good purchase, and this one, depending on how the results go, could potentially be. Now, it does fall short of the PG32UQX, however, it does get close enough to still give you a very popping HDR image. Now, if you're wondering about overclocking, I was not able to do it on this, whether or not G-Sync was enabled or disabled, so that's not going to be a thing. But in terms of the total system latency, here once again, it is somewhat impressing me, because here we have a 144 Hz mini LED panel, and if you know anything about mini LED, that extra LED backlight does tend to add a little bit of latency, and here you can see it's not too bad. It is falling a little bit short of the S95B at the same refresh rate, but only by 2.3 milliseconds. Now, when you compare it to the insanely fast 240 Hz LG OLED monitor, yes, it is around 11 milliseconds slower, so if you're super into high-end competitive gaming, you'd probably want to go for something more like that. However, this is fast enough, I would say, to use for some light competitive gaming, and it absolutely smokes the PG32UQX, which comes in at a dog slow 44.3 milliseconds. So as you can tell, it does seem to be doing everything fairly well versus just doing one thing really well, which is kind of where the Neo G8 or the PG32UQX excel. Neo G8 is a very fast monitor. The PG32UQX is a very bright monitor. This kind of strikes a balance. Now, in terms of the power draw, it can draw a lot. In a 100% HDR window, it did draw as much as 157 watts, making it draw even more power than the Quantum Dot G8 OLED. So that goes to show you it's not just OLED that's drawing a lot of power these days. Now, in terms of the UFO test, this one's very interesting. You guys are definitely gonna wanna pay attention, and this is yet another reason as to why I believe this is a far better purchase, even though it's nearly like a fourth the price than the PG32UQX, because as you can see, the image clarity is actually overall very good. Now, don't get me wrong, when you compare it to the OLED G8, obviously OLED is going to look cleaner, and LCD at 240 Hz also still does look a little bit cleaner when you take a look at that XZ273U. However, again, it is fairly clear for a mini LED 4K display that's more focused on the visuals, and overall, I'm pretty happy with it. Now, unfortunately, it looks like the low, medium, and high overdrive settings aren't really doing anything, and maybe they'll address that in a firmware update, so maybe it could get even faster. But even in its one overdrive setting, overall, it's fairly good. Now, in terms of the finish, guys, unfortunately, yes, that's right, it's using a semi-matte finish. But wait a minute. Before you go ahead and start throwing your monitor out the window, I will say, while I would much prefer if it had a glossy finish, for a number of reasons. Obviously, it's going to give you better color, it's going to give you better clarity. Glossy will always be superior to even the best semi-matte finishes. This is probably the best semi-matte finish that I've seen thus far. It really doesn't bother me too much. I would much prefer if it was glossy. I really do think it would look a lot better. However, it doesn't look terrible. It doesn't give you a horrible dirty screen effect, and the clarity isn't harmed too bad. The vibrancy isn't harmed too bad either. So it's probably the least aggressive I've seen. And in terms of the viewing angles, actually, unfortunately, the viewing angles is probably going to be my biggest gripe, are not very good on this display. If you're sitting off angle, this is not going to be a good one for you, and I really do think it could use with a slight curve. And of course, the uniformity is going to suffer a little bit because these LCD displays near the edges, when they're not slightly curved, you will notice some minor uniformity issues. Now, I didn't notice any major G-Sync flickering, so that's good. However, the only other gripe I would say is that it definitely looks like a very, very ugly display, but overall it does perform. So with all that being said, I would say this is definitely the best 4K mini LED HDR monitor on the market right now, and in fact, it's probably one of the best HDR monitors period. Now, the S95B does look better. It's got a glossy finish, it's got OLED response times, and the S95C is going to raise the brightness as well. So if you're looking for the best display on the market, the 55-inch S95C is almost certainly going to be that. And this won't give you quite as good of visuals as that or as good of motion, but that thing's 55 inches, so it's really kind of a stretch to call it a monitor. You can use it for a monitor, and I probably will, but if you're looking for a 32-inch or smaller monitor, honestly, from all the stuff that I've tested so far, this is probably the best option for HDR on the market right now, because again, it strikes that balance of giving you a good picture while not having to sacrifice your response times or latency too much. Sits right between the Neo G8 and the PG32 UQX, and it does so at just what I picked it up for, $850, a much lower price point than any other mini LEDs on the market. Now, there is a 27-inch version I will be reviewing next, so make sure you're subscribed for that, as it will actually bring the refresh rate up to 160 Hz, which could make the motion clarity even better, especially if they've tuned the display to have even better motion clarity. However, as for now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys, if you're looking for a 4K HDR monitor, this is the best one I've seen on the market so far. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, Rupro has you covered with their Rupro 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes ranging from 3 to 165 feet, and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And with 48 gigabits per second of bandwidth, it can easily drive 8K at 60 FPS or 4K at 120 FPS HDR10 video through its ultra-thin, flexible, and durable housing, and it even supports eARC. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out Rupro on Amazon today.